When I think of strategic minerals, I think of several things. One, that minerals are not inherently strategic, that they acquire the status of being strategic for several reasons. A mineral substance might be strategic because there is a particular technological development that suddenly elevates that mineral to a higher level of demand than would otherwise be the case. It might also be that demand relative to availability, which is to say scarcity, is so high that those who are in possession of those minerals, either as countries or as companies, acquire a position of advantage. You could, in those circumstances, then argue that that mineral becomes strategic. A mineral might certainly become very important in the international geopolitical space, such that countries in possession of that immediately have either a military, a scientific, or other advantage. A chemical substance, otherwise known as a mineral, would acquire the position of being strategic, and countries in possession of it would naturally want to leverage that so that they are in a better position relative to those with whom they compete. So far, I've spoken about the strategic nature of a mineral, wherein countries or companies are competing. What I haven't spoken about is a situation in which the value of that mineral in the national economy is such that even outside of competition with others, it acquired in the context of that country a strategic position. And so these, in my view, are the circumstances under which a mineral might be classified from a policy perspective, from an investment perspective, strategic. The example that comes to mind is that of uranium. During the Cold War, when the world was divided between those who advocated communist ideology and those who advocated capitalist ideology, military prowess was very much a part of how the world in the West and the world in the East were competing with each other for power. And one of the drivers of military power at the time was access to the substance uranium, because uranium could be used to develop nuclear arms, and nuclear weapons were considered some of the potentially more deadly. Anybody who had uranium therefore had the capacity to develop sufficient military might to be able to constitute a real threat. And so the idea of who has uranium, who has access to uranium, became center stage. So when I think of a mineral being strategic in a national economic context, it's hard not to see how gem diamonds are strategic to Botswana, in that Botswana's economy is almost entirely dependent on revenue from diamonds. And therefore, the manner in which the government of Botswana mines diamonds, sells diamonds, has to be approached strategically, business as usual. Another country that comes to mind is the West African country of Guinea-Conakry. So Guinea today has the world's largest unexplored iron ore deposits. So not only is physically the deposit huge, but the quality is phenomenal. And so if you think about it this way, then Guinea assumes a very unique position in the iron ore market, and potentially, even when they mine those deposits, they can be a game changer. And so it does make iron ore in Guinea potentially a very strategic asset, and it does warrant the government of Guinea adopting policies that enhance that strategic positioning of the deposit. But iron ore per se is not strategic. In my opening statement, I made reference to the fact that sometimes a mineral is rendered strategic because of prevailing technological trends. So lithium is a case in point. As the world shies away from fossil fuels as a source of energy and looking for more environmentally friendly alternatives. Battery storage is becoming an environmentally friendly option. And so batteries as means of storing energy have now taken center stage. It is this which warrants us saying those countries have a potentially strategic mineral. I use the word potential because the jury is still out. We expect that, in effect, electric cars will increase. But the truth of the matter is, here and now, the bulk of the world's vehicles, by a huge margin, still use fossil fuels. So that game changer may be in the horizon, but that day has not dawned upon us. The other thing, of course, that warrants my insight in the word potentially is that anything can change technologically. There's nothing to stop industrialists from coming up with something that suddenly renders lithium redundant, because another alternative, more commercially successful, that can be fast-tracked, might be introduced into our economies. And if that happens, then it would be a game changer. What it tells us is that this strategic nature isn't permanent. If you think about it, it's a window of opportunity to be taken advantage of. And so if countries feel now that they have lithium and that somehow this places them in a position of advantage, my suggestion, move and move fast. Time is of the essence. A perfect example of the time-sensitive nature and the potential for technology and geopolitics to change the status of a natural substance. So when I was at high school as a young girl, I remember in the 70s that in effect there was a huge oil shortage, and people panicked thinking that there would be no oil to fuel the world's industries and cars, etc., etc. That then put those countries that had oil, like Saudi Arabia, in a position of advantage. It was this also that led to the creation of OPEC, because then the producers felt it was necessary for them to come together and have a dispensation around which they would essentially control production and with that manipulate price to their advantage. Fast forward 40 years later, I'm no longer at primary school. As a matter of fact, I'm retired. But it turns out that oil is also about to retire for two reasons. One, the world is sick of fossil fuels, and the world is under pressure. I was reading a journal where the CEO of Shell is essentially strategically reinventing Shell to say, we are no longer an oil producer, we are an energy generator, meaning generating clean energy, because Shell's investors and the public are saying, we won't be putting more money in oil production. The most important takeaway is this, that governments, it's a moving target. So governments need to be very knowledgeable. Nothing is constant. A mineral may be considered redundant and of no value today. And suddenly, something changes in the world of technology, and bang, that mineral is very well sought after. Cobalt is, and several other minerals are very lightweight. They are non-corrosive. And so they have high demand in the IT technology. Now, IT technology is very new. But not only is the IT technology new, actually the trajectory is that everything in the future is going to be digital. So we see growth. So all of a sudden, a mineral that was, sort of regular has assumed center stage. And countries that have cobalt deposits suddenly find themselves sitting in a wealth of minerals much greater than otherwise would be the case. And so knowing this, understanding these trends, allows governments to then look at their own geological wealth and say, where are we? Which ones of the mineral wealth that we have is assuming global center stage? And what does that tell us? How should we now be negotiating with investors around these particular minerals? So I think the most important thing is knowledge, knowledge, and more knowledge. And using that knowledge, but essentially to navigate these changing trends such that governments are always, if possible, on top, and that they benefit when the minerals that they are in possession of rise in demand in the world for whatever reason.